Hi, this is Eli Kranzberg from Logic Pro Expert. Now, mixing vocals is something we all do, and it's probably one of the most significant elements in our mix in terms of making the song pop and sound good. And I want to explore mixing vocals in this couple of videos. And I say couple because my colleague Chris and I are doing an interesting kind of experiment here. We're each taking the same vocal track, and we're each going to process it using only Logic plugins. So it'll be a unique way to look at working with vocals where we have the same track, same DAW, same plugins, two different approaches. Now, let me start by playing you this dry, unprocessed vocal track as is, along with the backing track.
Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon, whatever keeps you alive. Whatever keeps you alive.
All right, so it's pretty dull as is.
Will I do
It's an average recording,
for
an average
you?
mic.
I'd put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon.
But I think it's pretty realistic and representative of what we often have to deal with. A little bit of plosives, a little bit of sibilants. Now let me play you my processed version, and then I'll show you what I've done.
Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon, whatever keeps you alive. Whatever keeps you alive.
All right, so there's a lot going on here. I'm going to start by bypassing everything here, and let's just route this to the main output. I'm going to a vocal bus with some processing on it, but to start with, this is where we're at.
Will I do anything for you?
First thing I have is some graphic EQ. Now, what I really like about this is we can tune it up and then get into the really high register here, so we can get some really high harmonics generated that add some really nice air and top-end presence. And, of course, I like the drive here, too.
Will I do anything for you? I'd put it all aside. The sun, the stars,
So,
the moon,
a bit of general EQing,
whatever
but this
keeps
is
you
the special
alive.
feature that I want from this. Now, after this, I have a compressor on here, and this is important because I tried the different models, and this is the one that I like the best in terms of taming the sibilants. I'll go through the different models, and you'll hear how they react differently to those S's. Here, I'm looping a short section.
The sun, the stars, the moon, whatever keeps you alive.
So taming it
the sun,
nicely.
The stars, the moon, whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars, the moon.
Too much emphasis.
Whatever keeps you alive.
That tames it
The
nicely,
sun,
too.
The stars, the moon, whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars, the moon.
That's not bad.
Whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars,
That's
the
not bad.
moon. Whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars, the moon.
Too much S.
Whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars, the moon.
I like that or this.
Whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars, the moon.
This one's a little bit more controlled for me. Now, after this, I'm going into the de-esser. So let's leave this section where the sibilance is pronounced. Let's leave that in place.
The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive.
So I'm losing some
The sun,
gain.
The stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive. The sun, the stars.
So that's the area I'm affecting. It's fairly
Whatever
low in
keeps
terms
you
of sibilance, and I'm
alive.
using the
The
wide
sun,
band.
the
That's why we're
stars, the
losing so much
moon.
volume.
Whatever keeps you alive.
We wouldn't lose
the
as
sun,
much
the
like that.
stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive.
But I like the way it's taming the S's better. We can make up the gain later down the signal flow. Now here, let me go back to the full vocal. I'm doing some more EQ just for some general tone shaping post all this sibilance control. So I got a little bit of roll off here, and I'm boosting a little bit up high at around 6K, and then a bit more up here because I got to make up some of that high-end air back.
Will I do anything for you?
And again, a bit
I'd
more
put
drive.
it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon.
So here we get that nice presence back, but it's not overly sibilant.
The sun, the stars, the moon.
And without it,
The sun, the stars, the moon.
so that's really helping add a bit more nice general tone to it. Now after this, I have the multipressor, and I spent some time working on this.
Will I do anything for you? I'd put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive.
So what I'm doing is using 3 bands, first of all, and all the ratios are about 2.5 to 1, roughly speaking. But I'm using this to just compress the low end a bit, get rid of some of the tubbiness. And here, the upper mids, I want to bring back some of that presence where the vocals is, but with the sibilants under control. So I'm compressing and then using a little bit of makeup gain. And you see my thresholds set here. So it's just triggering a little bit and then a couple of dB of makeup gain. I prefer that to the auto gain in this particular case. So let me just turn these all on and off and you'll hear the difference that this basic vocal channel strip setting is making. And then we're running it through a bunch of other buses for extra processing.
Will I do anything for you? I'd put it all aside.
So nice, clean, good vocal. If I ended here and just added a bit of reverb, we'd be fine. But there's more going on. Now, before we look at that, I want to show you one edit I've done on the track. And I do this often in my vocals, right in here, there's a K, the hard constant. I'm going to unmute this. And I want to play you this little phrase with it.
Keeps
you alive.
Whatever keeps you alive. Whatever keeps you alive.
And then with that muted, just a little bit of spit or mouth noise, whatever it is. I just did a marquee selection and muted this little bit. We're not going to notice the gap because it's so quick.
Whatever keeps you alive.
That K is just a little less hard.
Whatever keeps you alive.
So it softens the attack on the K. Now, let's start looking at the buses that I've got going on. I'm going to go to the mixer and I'm just going to route everything else. I have it going to a vocal bus, but I want to route it directly to the stereo output just so we can, kind of explore these changes one at a time. So back to here. So my first send is going to fat effects and sample delay. I want to create some space. So let me play it for you without this and I'll turn it on.
Will I do anything for you? I'd put it all aside.
Now I'm using this on a send to create a kind of stereo doubling effect. I'm using this with a little bit of modulation effects, and I've got the LFO assigned here to modulation effects rate, so it's moving back and forth in a sine wave, kind of smooth. But basically, that's what I'm using. I'm using a bit of saturation here. I love the distortion and saturation controls in fat effects. When they're used subtly, they can add some really nice harmonics. But I'm using the 2 there, and I think a bit of compression, and that's it. So let me just turn off sample delay, and we'll hear this one.
Will I do anything for you? I'd put it all aside.
Without it?
The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive.
So it's got that nice subtle modulating effect.
Oh.
And then I've used a stereo sample delay
Keeps you alive. Oh.
with different delays on each side. And if you look in milliseconds, that's how much time I'm using. And of course, it gives that stereoizing kind of effect. And with the modulation, it's a nice, smooth sound. And I'm sending this to reverb. Now, let's look at the reverb, because again, I'm doing something a little unusual here. What I'm doing is I'm going first into Space Designer, into a really small room. Let me, again, do these one at a time.
Will I do anything for you?
Without it.
I put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive.
So it's subtle, but I'm putting it in a small ambience. A little bit of EQ.
Whatever keeps you alive.
Just for a roll off at 340. I could have done it in here, but I used a separate EQ. And then into a more traditional reverb.
Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside.
So I started with one of the presets, and I think I altered it a little bit.
Whatever keeps you alive.
But nothing special, just some basic alterations to that.
Whatever keeps you alive.
And let's set this to the reverb as well. So this delay is getting sent to the reverb. So it's already sounding really nice. Now here on bus 2, I've got a nice throw kind of effect. I've got stereo delay with a dotted eighth and a quarter note set there, and I have the feedback all the way off, a little bit of crossfeed, but no actual feedbacks generated. And I have some automation here for this. So let me just go into the automation. You can see it's being dialed up on the one word. And you'll hear what happens when we get there.
Whatever keeps you alive. Oh, oh. Whatever keeps you alive. Oh, oh.
So it's that it's adding one extra throw of that. So that's a nice effect. And on bus 3, I'm going to some amp processing because I want to kind of thicken up and toughen up that low mid-range to get it a bit fuller. I've got some EQ before it with a couple of dips up high because I want to tailor what I'm feeding into this.
Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive.
So it's just adding a bit more weight in a specific area of the vocal range. Now here it gets interesting. On the track underneath, I've got a track set up with the volume all the way off and some sends set up in pre-fader mode so that we're going to hear this only through the effects. Now what I did was I copied one of these down by option dragging like that, and I time stretched it like that, and then I hit the reverse button to reverse it like that. So that's the way I created what you're about to hear. So let me just solo these over here and mute this, and you'll hear the effect. So this reverse checkbox is what's reversing it. So, and it's being sent to all the effects. Now I then have everything going through a vocal bus. So let me reassign everything through there. All right, so I've got it all looped, and let's just solo the vocal bus and we'll hear what's going on.
Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside.
Pad effects.
The sun, the stars, the moon.
I love the soft saturation
Whatever keeps you alive.
in parallel. Then the
Whatever
exciter.
keeps you alive. Will I do anything for you?
Bit of extra air.
I put it all
And then limiting. I'm cranking the
aside.
gain so I get a
sun,
little
the
bit of limiting.
stars, the moon.
And then just attenuating the
Whatever keeps you
channel strip.
alive.
Just to tighten the whole thing up. And let's listen to one final before and after. So here's the original track.
Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive. Oh, oh. Whatever keeps you alive. Oh, oh. Will I do anything for you? I put it all aside. The sun, the stars, the moon. Whatever keeps you alive. Oh, oh. Whatever keeps you alive. Oh, oh.
I know this video's run a bit long, but vocal processing, I think, is something that's important for all of us. So hopefully you've gotten a few tips, and be sure to check out Chris's video to see how he approached the same track. This is Eli Kransberg for Logic Pro Expert.